My big suggestion to students, particularly through high school, is
you can do anything.
Choose it for you, not for it is worth
it.
Just focus on the next
Doesn't
step.
matter what you're doing.
Don't be afraid.
As long as you're doing
That
something.
is such good advice.
I don't think I could see myself doing
It's a
anything else.
challenging life.
Student nights, Wednesday to
Oh,
Saturday.
I worked on that house.
I racked up every single dollar of debt that I
I
possibly
think
could.
there's a lot of pressure on high school.
Yeah,
kids
I just
these days,
love working outside.
And if money is something that you care a lot
In
about,
hindsight, that
I've
was,
also been a very indecisive
But you
person.
keep looking for roads that have been less
It
travelled.
was just that moment that I knew what I wanted to do. So nothing else is going to change that.
Welcome to the guest speaker.
So today on the guest speaker, we welcome Hannah Rogers, someone whose connection to the natural world began at home. Her passion for the environment was sparked early, growing up with parents who shared a deep love and respect for nature, and that foundation has shaped the path she is on today. You completed a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science Research with first-class honours at the University of Waikato before embarking on your PhD. Not all PhDs are created equal, and you were lucky enough to become involved with and be supported by the George Mason Charitable Trust Scholarship. Funding like this makes advanced research possible for emerging scientists like you, and we will discuss that opportunity with you today. As a little background, George Mason was a botanist, a highly decorated academic and a philanthropist, and was made the Officer of New Zealand Order of Merit for his services to conservation, philanthropy and community in 2020. Early in your doctoral journey, you had the privilege of meeting George Mason himself, someone you remember as warm, courteous, and highly invested in the next generation. His lifelong dedication to supporting the environment in New Zealand ensures that meaningful applied science, especially work around Taranaki region, will continue to shape communities for generations to come. Your doctoral research explores epiphyte host relationships in urban environments, focusing on plants that are often overlooked. Epiphytes are unique. They grow on other plants for structural support, simply perching rather than drawing nutrients from them. Through your work, you're bringing attention to ecology and the physiology of these remarkable species. The knowledge you're generating helps inform conservation, restoration strategies, particularly in warmer, higher modified cities. Your work also helps explain why places like New Plymouth, for example, with older forests and sheltered habitats, support richer epiphyte communities than cities such as Hamilton, where you are right now. As you near the completion of your PhD at just age 26, your research feels especially timely. Cities are becoming warmer and drier. Some species will adapt, others will struggle. By understanding these differences now, you're helping councils, communities, and decision makers plan for a more resilient future. I recently met a 16-year-old aspiring botanist who is clearly infatuated with the work you did. He's already contributing to articles and photos on orchids to journals. Can you believe it? I couldn't. When he saw your work, he was inspired by the possibilities of following a similar path. While plants may not be everyone's passion, there are young people who deeply care about sustainability and the natural world. They're eager to explore biology, ecology, and environmental research in ways that makes a real difference. Today's podcast is for those students, curious, motivated, unafraid of fieldwork, who see science as a tool for real-world impact. It's also a chance to hear from an academic who reminds us that passion, dedication, and love of learning, no matter what field, is always worth celebrating. Welcome to the guest speaker, Hannah. It's lovely to have you here. Can I take you back to those early days? I mentioned maybe there was even with your parents that there was an influence early on to send you down that path. So maybe even childhood and your early education. How did it go for you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, from probably quite a young age, well, I guess I was privileged to have the parents that I did. And they, from a young age, were constantly showing us things in the environment and inquisitive themselves, I suppose. I'm actually originally from Zimbabwe, so we moved here when I was only 4 years old. And my mum got a Master of Science in Ecology as well. And my dad was a guide in Zimbabwe for a while, so obviously they had strong connections with the environment, and were always eager to look at things and find out what was happening and why we were seeing what we saw. So that was amazing. And we moved here, like I said, when I was just 4, and we moved to a little town called Apotiri in Coromandel, and that was really amazing coming from a landlocked country in Zim to being able to explore the coast, and that was something that really motivated my parents to move there. Aside from, of course, all the trying to escape with the troubles of Zimbabwe, but so from an early age, them getting us excited, all 4 of us. I have 3 siblings, so we were all running around outside a lot and had that privilege of growing up in a small town where we could run around and explore the environment in a fairly safe way. So that was a massive privilege.
Yeah. What was some of those experiences like with mum and dad, even like teaching you stuff as like with plants and with, or was it, so how did, or was it just the fact they were interested?
It was everything. I think my mum was particularly fascinated by plants, and I think actually in a funny way, that's what made me from a young age, when I started school, say, I'm not going down that road, as kids do. And my dad really, his excitement grew from learning all the birds in Zimbabwe. So different elements of the environment, but even just, walking along the beach, we were constantly looking at what shells they were, showing them to our parents, and they would explain what they knew about it, and would keep looking things up and trying to understand it together. It was, a really special environment to grow up in. And that kind of just, I mean, initially pushed me away from it as a younger kid. And then as I grew up, I sort of reflected on that special connection that I have always felt with the environment.
Yeah, wicked. You remind me a little bit when we had Nathan Wallace on, who's a neuro expert, talking about parenting. And I suppose if there was someone listening to this and they've got young kids or babies, or in the future they're going to be parents, it's just such a cool way of raising kids. Don't plonk them behind a tablet, get outside, dig holes, look at worms, plants. They've obviously done a fantastic job. So look, from there you had this curiosity. What was your schooling like? Where did you go for school?
So I actually started in a post-secondary school, a very small school, for just my first year. And then when my older sister, because I'm the youngest of 4, so she's about 7 years older than me, when she started secondary school, my parents wanted us to go to a reasonable school, so we moved to Tamaheri at that point. And I started at Tamaheri Model Country School from year 2 to the end of primary school. And that was, both schools were really special in terms of, there was a lot of sort of hands-on learning, I suppose, being in the outdoors, and that sort of encouragement, little gardens around Tamaheri School, and just lots of creative stuff as well. But good teachers, I suppose it's a combination of factors.
Yeah. Yes, it's so interesting. It's we had Rebecca, a sailor, and mum and dad chucked her in boats as a kid, and off she went. Now she's an around the world sailor making history, and here's you. It's incredible, the impact on childhood. Secondary school. What was? How did that? I'm starting to think by secondary school you're going to start to flourish and do well. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think when I look back on it, I don't actually think through primary school or really much of secondary school I realized exactly what I would end up doing. And even towards the end of secondary school, I was doing all the sciences and maths. I'm more of an analytical brain than creative per se, so that definitely pushed me in that direction. But I definitely wasn't thinking of getting into ecology specifically. But I knew that I really loved research and sort of towards the end of school, I was heading towards actually looking at medical laboratory, so doing health sciences in Dunedin, thinking I like science and I like research, so this would be an interesting space to go into. And I did spend my first year in Dunedin, but ultimately I realized that working in the lab was not exactly what I wanted to do full time. So yeah, it was sort of it wasn't super straightforward for me. It wasn't something like when I was 5 or 6, some people say that they know what they want to do. It wasn't like that for me. But I did have that connection, I think, which just took a little while for me to realize how much I wanted to give back to the environment as well, and how important it is to me and my parents and connections.
You were Hillcrest High?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So you were Hillcrest High. Just jumping back slightly, you said the sciences and the maths. So we're talking biochem, physics, calc as your subjects, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I took biology and chemistry and statistics in my first and second year. And then in my final year, I actually picked up physics in anticipation of doing health science, which was quite a difficult one to pick up in your third year. And I did calculus in the third year as well. But yeah, so fairly science heavy. I also did history, which I really enjoyed and was fascinated by. Unfortunately, I was sort of, given messages about, well, if you stick with, moving in that direction of history, you'd pretty much, the only option would be teaching. So I suppose some of those messages definitely influence you from those earlier ages. So that's sort of where I was pushed.
Yeah. What sort of marks were you getting, Hannah? Just to reflect, if someone's thinking PhD in the sort of work, I mean, I'm presuming you're an excellence kid. You got excellence endorsements, or am I wrong?
Yeah, no, I was getting excellence endorsements. So yeah, it's I think it's important for science to have that strong foundation moving into it for sure. Although I did certainly meet some people starting off at university who didn't have the sciences behind them, which I think would have been quite difficult. And so, unfortunately, although it seems like a lot of pressure from that young age, really from 15 or 16, to be making decisions like that, I think it does make a big difference for getting straight away into university. And yeah, I think even more so for health science than environmental science, having good grades is pretty critical. Although, yeah, it depends as well if you're planning to go into postgraduate studies or not. It's not, although you can't, I mean, you could do an ecology degree, a bachelor's, and then do some more practical hands-on sort of applied work, and that's also quite a different pathway to take.
Yeah. So you left when you left school, you were going to Otago to start first year med, which didn't work out. You didn't enjoy that. At some point you've pulled out. What was the decision around Waikato? And then let's talk about Waikato, like where you went. Did you stay at home and live there? Did you go to halls? Was there a scholarship involved? Like, so yeah, how did that Otago to Waikato work out? How did that go?
Yeah, it was I suppose for most 18-year-olds quite a turbulent time in my life in general. First of all, making the decision to go down and do that, or to start that degree. And then it was actually only 2 weeks into the course when I just thought, this is not it. I know. And I can't really explain why I had that feeling. I just knew that it wasn't going to be what I wanted to do. In terms of, they have all these amazing big, very smart and new labs in Otago, fantastic university. And I was in there, studying for chemistry and thinking, there's something not right. I can't explain it, but I just knew that it wasn't that. And a strange thing actually was that at that point, reflecting on what I was doing and what I should be doing was I drove down with my sister to Dunedin, who was also studying there earlier that year. We drove and then caught the ferry to take her car down. And on the ferry, we were standing outside and talking about going down to Dunedin and what was happening and everything. She was in her final year of her Bachelor of Science as well, and we were sort of discussing what direction we were heading in, and she wasn't too pleased to be going back, to be honest with you. And I asked her, well, take aside everything, the money or the location, what would be your dream job? Just on the spot, tell me without thinking about it too much. What first flicks in your mind? And she said the same to me. And strangely enough, I said working in the environment almost immediately, although I was going down at that point still to do health science. So then after the 2 weeks in, I thought, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I should be in ecology. And so, yeah, that's what drove that change. And I stayed and finished that first semester of courses. The first whole year in Dunedin, but the first semester of health science. And then I was thinking more broadly about the value of the Bachelor of Science and Environmental Science and where would be the best place to do it. And actually coming back made more sense at that time. And I also had a job opportunity lined up, well, an internship, which, so it all kind of fit together and was a lot easier to move back at that point.
Well, because I also university jumped, and I think mine was pretty similar. And that's why I wanted to ask you is, why did you decide to stay for the year? Because for me, I was sort of like, oh, I think there's still things to be gained from this opportunity, and I'm gonna make that pivot. Like, I was pretty confident in it. So I think I enjoyed the year I was at AUT more because I knew it was gonna be temporary, and then I also transferred back to Waikato. So what was your thinking and thoughts of staying the entire year down in Otago?
Yeah, I suppose it was quite a big decision to make, first of all, to actually step out of health science, and quite quickly. So I was sort of thinking, I don't want to change everything all at once. There was that side to it. But also I thought, well, it is a bachelor's, so generally cross-crediting isn't a massive issue, as long as it's within the relevant subjects. So I did all the first semester papers for health science, like cells and chemistry. And then in the second semester, I changed to more ecology focused and statistics papers. And yeah, those were actually really helpful in the end because of Otago's standards and their style of education. Moving up here, everything was cross-credited, so I didn't lose anything or lose any time. But yeah, I thought at that point I was enrolled for halls as well, of course, so it would have been far more complicated to try and break out of all of those things at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had a lot of kids that first year, and it's a really good discussion to have. And I suppose this is what we're trying to avoid, is if the more we know, the more maybe we don't enter something we don't want to do. So you went, again, did you get a scholarship to Waikato or not? Because I would have thought after school you would have probably walked into one. Did that work out?
Yeah, I think when I was finishing up Hillcrest, I remember there was a lot of advertising for great scholarships at Waikato, and I definitely know people who made the most of those. I didn't because at the end of school, I thought I need to leave home and I need a break and I need to be away from my parents, and I wanted that experience as well of Otago with having my sister there and knowing what her journey was like as well. I thought that was something I really wanted to experience. So I sort of prioritized that over money at that point. So no, I didn't for my bachelor's, but I did get first year free as well. So it wasn't a massive strain for that first year, regardless. And then, yeah, it was more sort of master's and PhD, obviously, that the scholarships were a part of it.
Yeah. You're touching on an interesting conversation too, which is a little bit broader, which is that whole idea of multiple universities, whether it be kids who do a bit here and go overseas, or my daughter was at Waikato and now she's at Canterbury. It's a real, it can be done, and it can be actually a really good thing to do. Can I talk then earlier around your study once did you go second year ecology, because you've sort of done something in Otago? What were you studying at Waikato? What does that look like? What are the sort of things you're learning so kids who are similar to you can hear about the learning side of it?
Yeah, so there's two different courses, right? So there's environmental science, so Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science, or there's ecology and biodiversity at Waikato. They're slightly different, like some of the papers do overlap, but environmental science is more focused on, I would say, especially for a bachelor's, it's more focused on major environmental issues that we're facing globally. So we would cover a lot of topics from, water pollution to pollution in space to all the different impacts that we're having, that humans are having anthropogenically on the environment. Um, and then we did have, optional papers of, well, yeah, papers you could choose that you were more interested in, whether it was soils or whether it were plant structure and function or things like that. Whereas ecology, slightly different angle to it, more on, community composition and pattern and process. So because I was in environmental science, still not really 100% sure what direction I was fully headed in at that point, in terms of plant ecology. So I was still keeping quite a broad view of things. But yeah, you cover it's very broad. All the subjects you cover, from a lot of monitoring, because environmental jobs often include some form of monitoring. Data collection is really important. So a lot of council jobs involve, monitoring water quality, soil quality. So going to different sites and looking at certain impacts, whether that's agricultural impacts or development impacts, and how to mitigate those and essentially help the environment. So quite a range, yeah.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of geographers would be loving that sort of stuff. I've had quite a few kids of my own go through there. Yeah. How did you transition from NCA to university stuff? Did you continue to do really well? Did you find maybe that was it more difficult, or did you maintain your grade levels?
I think I did pretty well, yeah, throughout. There were some papers that were more challenging than others, but yeah, I think towards my third year at school as well, I enjoyed school, but I was sort of less and less present in year 13 because of sometimes finding it quite like a rigid structure and style of teaching. So I sort of was getting a bit sick and tired of some of the processes and ways that school was set up. And then yeah, sort of getting into university, quite different in terms of more content heavy, more independent learning, and only a few hours of classes a day, and then sort of the rest is up to you to make sure that you get everything done. So I think it depends on your style of learning and whether that suits you or not. It can be really tough on some people, and especially not having teachers constantly around you saying, "Have you done this?" or yeah, "Are you keeping on track with everything?" So you definitely need that side of motivation and yeah, and determination to get through the work at university.
Absolutely. So now kids are sitting there, your master's and PhD. When we get to the higher end, how are those decisions made? Are you invited? Are you putting your hand up? Are you creating things you want to work on? Can you talk through kids who are sitting there going, I love this tertiary study concept, but how does the end bit work? Can you explain that to them?
Yeah, for sure. I think once you come towards the end of your bachelor's, generally is when people start thinking about, okay, what's next? And plenty of people go away and work, obviously, in between degrees. That is the sensible thing to do often, to sort of see what suits you and what you enjoy or not. And from a bachelor's, without carrying on to further education, you can definitely get some good hands-on applied work in terms of, working for a restoration consultancy or something. But if you're wanting to go further in the academic world, or you're interested in research specifically, the next step is usually a master's. Some people can do a Bachelor of Honours and then into a PhD as well, an honours degree, sorry. But yeah, the usual step is master's. So it's fairly straightforward in the sense that if that's something you're interested in and you think you will be up for it, you can just apply as usual for the bachelor's for those papers that you're interested in. There are certain requirements, but you can choose a few of them, and then you apply for those papers. And usually, once you're in the papers, people will start in the first year doing their papers, and then you make more connections, especially with other academics, and you start thinking about what direction you're heading into, how you're specializing, and then you sort of target certain academics, speaking to them about supervision, and that leads into your thesis, which is when you really get into the research component.
When you said the word requirements, are you saying you've got to have done well in your first part of your degree? Like not anyone can go masters or honours, or is that not true?
Yeah, no, they do normally require, I think it's a minimum of usually a B plus grade average. Um, should definitely check. It might vary by university, but from memory, it's about that. And for honors, I think it might be slightly higher. It might be A minus or something as your average. So yeah, you do need to have reasonable grades just so that they have confidence in you getting through it, because the master's level paper, to give you an idea, your third year at university for a bachelor's, the 300 level papers, and your master's papers are 500 level. So that's an indication of that step up, um, in terms of workload, how content heavy papers are, and the expectations of how much you're learning within that space and time. So it's definitely a more demanding course, although I really loved it in comparison to the bachelor's. I actually much preferred it because it's a smaller class, it's more interactive with the lecturers. It's like a seminar format where you're presenting almost every few weeks on a research paper, and then and the students rotate around like that, presenting and then discussing it as a class. And yeah, it's more interactive, I suppose, than someone standing at the front and lecturing at you without you having any conversation back. So that's sort of when people start getting a better idea of, yeah, I'm really interested in working in that specific space, or I love birds and I'm going to go into that space, or whatever it happens to be, which is really helpful at the beginning of your master's to kind of help you navigate.
Mhm. So that'll really appeal to some kids. In fact, they'll be looking forward to those last few years, I'd imagine. They'd be a lot like you. Can we then, so we make sure we touch on it, this whole opportunity you got, when I tracked you down, you were in newspapers, you'd been sort of put out there was this wonderful opportunity, and I mentioned sort of in my intro about that. How did that sort of opportunity come, and then that work you did, and what have you been researching and finding out that has been fascinating?
Yeah, yeah, I think I've been lucky in a lot of respects and timing wise, a lot of things come down to timing and your connections, of course, is always very important. So yeah, I think from an early stage, I've been talking to lots of people and engaged and involved in as many ways as possible. So I mean, really, the PhD is obviously a massive component of my life, but in terms of ecology, there's lots of other avenues that I've taken to be engaged with different groups of people, and I think that's essentially what has led me down this road. And I think it's something that when you're really passionate about a topic, it'll drive you in all sorts of ways to make an impact, not just in theory or research in these high level sort of academic spaces, but also I really enjoy looking at the applied side, so practically how to make a difference on the ground. So I've been really fortunate in having so many opportunities to be a part of, yeah, a full range of environmental activities. And yeah, I think making the most of those. So in my master's papers, for example, just obviously working really hard, doing my best in those, and then growing connections with the academics in those classes. That led to my supervision, getting a supervisor and scholarships with that. And then for my PhD with George Mason as well, that was to do with connections, and through my supervisor building that background essentially.
And so can you talk through the sort of study for that kid who, like I say, I've run into one after 25 years who was just taking photos of orchids, which just fascinated me that there was a kid doing that. What sort of things are you learning? Like, what are you looking at? What even if it's really geeking out and nerding out on this stuff, because there will be someone really interested in this.
Yeah, no, it's always hard to know how much detail to go into. But no, my research is largely looking at plant community ecology, which is I think quite a nice scale because it's a scale we can all see and hopefully somewhat relate to, if it's shown to us properly. So I'm looking at plants' interaction with other plants, as well as their environment. So yeah, like you said, focusing on epiphytes, which are plants that are structurally dependent. So in New Zealand, we have a lot of ferns, orchids, or nest epiphytes. Some people call widow makers, you might know of. When you're walking in the forest and you look up at the canopy, there's essentially another whole world up there of plants. And yeah, some of these big nests or asterias that fall down in the storms, people call those a widowmaker. So I'm looking at all of those plants and a whole range of different relationships. So in terms of trying to understand why we see their relationships with their host species, so the tree that they establish on, why are some species more likely to occur on certain hosts than others? So what are the traits or the characteristics of those species that allow them to match up? But also what are some of the environmental variables driving those relationships? So for epiphytes being structurally dependent, the major abiotic constraint, which is water availability, right? So they don't have any connection to the ground, so they're essentially limited to rainfall or frequency of rainfall, as well as humidity, being in a high humid environment. So I'm looking at it from all different angles, exploring those relationships as well as their physiology. I've done a 3-month experiment growing 4 different epiphyte species in the glass house just on campus here, and then looking at their photosynthesis, stomatal conductance, so their physiological responses to water stress, but also light availability. So yeah, it's a whole different a whole range of relationships looking at why we see what we see. Yeah, it's quite a lot.
Grace, I'm going, woo.
I was
Um,
getting, well, you were explaining it in like, which I guess is part of what you're studying is like being able to transfer that to basic knowledge. So someone like Ludlam and I, like I'm following enough, but I guess that's next step is like, okay, you learn all these important, interesting things, you discover them, and then it's like, okay, what do we do with that? Because the average person's not going to follow what you just said, but they interact with that environment all the time. So I think that's
Yeah.
interesting about why PhD pathways and all that are so important. And then it's how it feeds back into the community and actually goes, okay, well, I've learned this. Here's what I need you to do. Or like, this is how it
Yeah.
interacts with you.
Oh no, absolutely. And I think the communication side, science communication, is really important. So, yeah, that's using all the science jargon or terminology isn't that helpful. But I think um, one of the best ways of showing people or, yeah, explaining some of it is actually in person walking around. So I've also had that privilege with demonstrating for some of the science papers, the ecology papers at Waikato, going on field trips and being able to show people different species that they never knew existed, some of our small native orchids and that as well. So yeah, I think at this stage when you're in the thick of a PhD like I am, it's all swirling around in my head, those terms, but it's essentially species interactions and the environmental conditions driving those. So quite a range of topics. But yeah, I think it's most important to be able to communicate those in terms of what it means for the spaces such as restoration and ecology, in terms of how you apply it, rather than just um, all the information that we learn from this sort of research.
so Hannah, if I was to, I hope I don't throw you in this, explain why this is important. I mean, I think you just started to touch on it, but I suppose why would someone care? And I mean, I know it's desperately important we understand these things, but could you explain to a layman if you're in a biology class in a year 13, year 12, 13, going, this is why what I do is what I do?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think my PhD specifically is just covering one little slice, and that's the thing is that you're contributing your little piece, but contributing to the existing knowledge. And for me, it's the side of greater awareness of species tolerance. So, what environmental conditions can species tolerate? And how that relates to how we're restoring ecosystems. So, ecological restoration is looking at um, increasing and restoring the native vegetation that would have been here prior to human disturbance. So, a lot of our cities in particular have been cleared of native vegetation for development purposes, but sometimes that has been somewhat careless in terms of planning and a little bit reckless perhaps in some places. So in a lot of New Zealand cities, but also internationally, ecological restoration is becoming more and more important, and recognised as something that we really need to do to not only look after the environment and all the ecosystem services that we get from the environment, but also for the health of the people in the cities, and their connection with nature. So that's quite a general connection, obviously, I'm making with my research, but essentially trying to look at epiphytes as a generally overlooked group of species and their importance in restoration and how we can improve their diversity and presence in restoration.
Yeah, because you sort of touched on something, because this is what education's all about, isn't it? Because I took something and related it to something I know a lot about, which is reef systems. And that tolerance, there's a lot of researchers. Why are some species adapting to sea temperature changes and others aren't? And actually transferring some of those species into the areas that aren't doing well, knowing they will thrive. So yeah, that was interesting. I feel like a bit of a fraud too, because we do a Mangatotiri trip we used to when I was in Cambridge, and we used to look at vegetation change with altitude. And I'm thinking I should have had someone like you there, because I'm not convinced not convinced I knew much. Um, and can I also touch on Otago used to do a science communication course or degree, and we had Molly, an ex-student on, and she did it. And it was taking your knowledge and basically learning how to, it was like the COVID times, how do we explain to the mass public something complicated? I don't think they do it anymore, but I think it would be a wonderful study and degree, because there's a lot of, I think you're doing a wonderful job. It's like you've done it. When you said science, you were exploring things in photosynthesis and things. What instruments or scientific stuff do you have? Because it's obviously not a visual thing. You're not watching the plant. What are you doing? And what are you taking something to a lab and scraping stuff off or burning it? Or what's the science stuff?
Yeah, for the physiology experiment, which was 3 months, I was there's a lab upstairs here which I have access to, and there's a lot of funky and expensive equipment in there. I was using a photosynthesis machine, which is a portable thing which you can basically, it's quite chunky, but I carried it down the hill to the glasshouse compound where I was keeping my fans during the experiment. And I had to carry it down there every time because it's a very expensive piece of equipment. But essentially, that's got a little clamp or a leaf clip that would place on each leaf that I was measuring. And then that would take readings. You wait for it to stabilize and acclimatize, obviously, but then you take the readings basically from that machine. And then I was using other instruments, including measuring chlorophyll fluorescence, which is essentially something looking at plant stress, so how they're responding to stress, how much stress they're under from either high light or low water availability. So I was taking like more complicated physiology measurements like that, but then also just general leaf counts, looking at soil moisture, how quickly the plants were drying out, as well. And so, that those 3 months were quite intensive. I had some for the fluorescence measurements. I was taking pre-dawn measurements, so I was at the university very early, in the glass house taking those, and then had at least about 3 days a week of taking measurements. So it was very time consuming, but important it's going to be a whole chapter in my thesis. So an important experiment for me.
Weird question. Are there still science fairs for kids at school? Do you know? Did you go to any?
There was, when I was at school, but I'm not sure anymore. I feel too far removed from school, but I'm
Yeah.
hoping they do. I think it probably depends on the school as well, but Hillcrest was quite good in having things like that.
Yeah. So so kids can get a perception that they're going to be loving this higher learning and this understanding, whether it be what you're doing or it could be in the world of psychology like my daughter's doing, but you're at that high level understanding. Where does that likely take you in terms of employment? Are you working for councils and government? Are you going overseas to even go even higher and do so? Yeah. So where does it lead? Have you looked at that? Have you looked at your options moving forward?
Absolutely. So there's a few different paths that you can take. Generally speaking, the further you go into education, so after a master's, starting a PhD can actually restrict, well, somewhat limit the number of pathways you go down, it seems, although at the moment, anyways, this could change. But a master's is kind of a sweet spot for a lot of people because you've got that extra qualification on top of your bachelor's. But in some cases, people talk about being overqualified as a PhD. But yeah, there's basically 3 different broad paths you can go down in terms of either working for government or one of the regional or local councils, into consultancies or staying in academia. Those are the 3 broad paths. And if you're going to go into academia, then PhD is generally the direction you have to go in. And after a PhD, there is also opportunities to do a postdoctorate, which is where you're employed at the university. It's not another degree, but it's usually 1 or 2 years of staying in research. So you're conducting research and publishing through a program or a lab. And lots of people wanting to stay in academia or go on to become a lecturer or whichever road it is, they go down that track. So yeah, there's definitely few different options, and even within the space of consultancies, for example, there's huge variation in what that looks like, which I think is a really nice thing because there's lots of options. It's not although there's one job that you either get or you don't at the end of your degrees.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I have this awkward scenario with a son who went trades and a daughter who went academia, like you're discussing. And of course, the son's comment is, are you ever going to work? Probably a fair question. This has been fascinating. We've had a few guests, say, Grace, where you sit back and, no, I don't feel stupid, but I just love hearing someone talk in depth on a topic. Like it is,
And there's questions that we're probably not thinking to ask, and I'll ask that at the end. But one thing, and you mentioned it with the thesis writing, and obviously you having that really strong understanding grasp on like the math, the science, yes, but like publications, etc. Like you are doing a lot of writing as well. How do you enjoy it, or is that something that like I don't know, is it like a stereotype that scientists don't like to, doctors' handwriting, how they have terrible handwriting? Like, how do you interact with how much writing and reading has to happen?
I think I enjoy it on the whole, because I'm someone who really enjoys challenging myself. I love how much variety there is in what I do, and that maybe that comes into the question of, are you ever going to work? I love the research so much, because of, you have so much say over what you're doing on a daily basis that, it's a massive luxury, although there's obviously limitations to it. But no, it is something where you have to be comfortable with the amount of reading and writing and that side of it. I quite enjoy it. Writing can be quite difficult. I tend to sort of break up my days in terms of having the writing earlier in the morning when I'm fresh. It works different for everyone, and then I can switch into doing more statistics in the afternoon and reading papers. So it's nice because it's not there's no one really saying you have to do this or do that, but at the end of the day, you have to be motivated and keep yourself on track to make sure you are going to finish. I think that's probably one of the biggest struggles is, it's such a big project, especially a PhD versus a master's even, to sort of get a gauge on where you are, how you're tracking, and when you need to make a decision by to make sure that you are going to finish. I think those are all things that you've kind of got to trust yourself. You've got to make those calls, and but also having having great supervisors obviously is something that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, when I mentioned the George Mason thing, can you just briefly touch on, because I think he left the university around 5 million, am I right? And
Yes,
some
yeah.
some of that you've been able to tap into. So just briefly touch on what that opportunity is, because here's a guy who clearly is passionate to want after. So he's since passed away. He obviously wants these things to continue. Can you explain briefly about that?
Yeah, a really amazing and generous man, who just had an amazing curiosity, obviously, and that's his major legacy is how much he's given back to science research in particular. So he gave the university, yes, $5 million, although he's been giving money for much longer prior to that. And he's given money, another $5 million, to Auckland University, where he did his master's. And he's given $5 million to Massey, I believe. And before the $5 million donation to Waikato, he had already been involved in a number of donations. So he was a physiologist, a plant physiologist, and lived most of his life in Taranaki, hence the interest in funding research connected to Taranaki. A lot of, there's not really great access to research there because of the location of our universities in New Zealand. It's kind of a out of the way place a lot of the time for most people. So that was really a great way of him connecting students back up to Taranaki and doing some work there. So he has given an amazing amount of money and just interest in ensuring that it all goes towards research that is going to help the environment in the long run.
Yeah, no, amazing. Yeah, look, I just want to thank you for what you've done today, because we're looking careers and we're looking pathways, and it doesn't always have to be that job at the end. It'll be interesting to catch up with someone like you in 3, 4, 5 years' time. My son will eagerly be wanting to know what that job is actually called. But look, I think there are lots and lots of kids, and we've got plenty coming up on our podcast, who are just extremely academic. They love that curiosity. I love the way it didn't perfectly go to plan, even going to Otago, because some people think that kids like you, it all just goes to plan, and the scholarships and the study, and there's no confusion. But I think you dealt with that well, and it's a really wise thing. I can see why you did it. You said early on too, that engagement with lots of people, you were constantly looking for connections. And I think that was the bit I took, because I'm noticing, again, I don't want to keep mentioning it with my daughter, there always seems to be a lecturer and a person she's connected to and having discussions with and debating. And so you reach a point where that academia is the thing you love. And what you're doing is really, really cool. So, but too, sharing that with other kids, I just want to thank you a lot for that. I just have one more question before I ask Grace. To finish off, has AI got any, is it beginning to raise its head in your area? Are there positives there or not? Just curiosity wise.
Yeah, AI is and in the media a lot now as well, in terms of educators becoming concerned with it and its use. I think definitely massive positives, but also downsides to it, of course. It's something that I think, when it's used appropriately as a tool, like anything, is going to be really powerful, and I think speed up a lot of processes that aren't taking away from our creativity as researchers and the need for that experience that you bring, obviously, to writing and everything. But in terms of coding, I think it's really helpful. So that sort of side, which is more, it should be somewhat automatic. It's not really you drawing on your knowledge. It's just things like R coding can be really helpful. So I think that's definitely making a big difference. And that's, sort of become, obviously, ChatGPT in the last about 2 or 3 years has grown so much. It's incredible. But there's also a lot of worry with some of the online examination. I think more so for bachelor's students at the moment coming in and them being over reliant on it. So I think it's still really important to understand and have a decent foundation before getting into using it as a tool. But yeah, there's that. Obviously, I think it's going to be a dance for a little while in terms of getting the right balance, and hopefully we can strike it right.
Yeah, yeah. No, wicked. And I just want to say before Grace finishes off, your parents must be very proud from seeing you run around as a little child, doing all the outdoors stuff to do what you're doing. It must be that whole journey. Pretty cool.
Hannah, last question we always ask is if you could go back to your year 12/13 self, maybe the one as you described was a little bit over the high school structure at that point, what advice would you give yourself to yourself specifically?
I think I would tell myself to follow my passions, to think long and hard about what those are, and to not try to follow a pathway that's going to please other people, but is something that, you're spending most of your week and most of your life really doing. So, to focus more on, on what are you going to be passionate about, and how can you see yourself in the future really engaging with that work, would be the main thing. But of course, everyone's wired very differently.
Seriously, thank you so
Yeah.
much, Hannah. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, been spectacular.
Just
And I just want to put a shout out to that George Mason Trust, because although we touched on it and he has departed, I'm sure that's going to support you immensely. And I can't wait to read that PhD.
You'll read it.
thanks.
I love to read the extracts or the summary.
Yeah, I think just one other thing I'll say is that there's this obviously complex side to any part of research when you become this specialized. But like you were saying with that 16-year-old, did you say, Blair?
Mm,
It's just
yeah.
getting really excited about something. I think it's about nurturing that interest. And honestly, what really led me down this track in terms of from the stage of my masters was through COVID. Going out into my backyard, which at that time was Mangatautri. My parents lived just at the base, and at that point, I still didn't know exactly what topic I was going into, but I started learning all the plants, and just showing my interest in something like that grew into this massive thing. And yeah, I'm really grateful for that, and I think that's partly with getting that opportunity to slow down sometimes and just enjoy things, and realizing how much I was enjoying it led me down this track. So yeah, I'd say for anyone who's interested in the environment at all, just to take a look around you and be more observant and enjoy all the little things, and you never know where it will send you.
No. And can I say, when I got to mention your name, because you saved me, when this boy said orchids and sending off articles and photos, like I could have been a fish out of water. I mentioned your name. I Googled it up. I went, I'm going to interview this girl. And he was like, oh no, this is amazing. Like it is really quite special. So yeah, I'm hoping one day he gets to go to an open day to Waikato and meet you, because I sort of said I might be able to hook you up, but there you go. Yeah.
No, I would
No.
love to, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, cool. Hey, look, you take care and best of luck with the rest of your studies. And thank you so much for supporting us. It's been really cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for reaching out, and all the best with it. I think it's amazing what you guys are doing, and I think very important. Schooling often doesn't provide us enough guidance, and it's such a difficult age to navigate. So the more information, the better.
Oh, thank you, Hannah.